Have you ever felt like a mental health condition was controlling your life, leaving you trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty? I completely understand. I once lived with debilitating anxiety attacks, clinical depression, and drug and alcohol addiction, feeling as though I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. But what if I told you that self-care became my lifeline, helping me break free from that cycle? In this video, I'm going to share my personal journey and the self-care practices that not only ended my anxiety attacks, depression, and addictions, but transformed my entire life. Stick around and I promise you'll discover new insights that may help you regain control and find peace, even amidst chaos. According to the CDC, mental health disorders are among the most common health conditions in the United States, with more than 1 in 5 adults experiencing a mental health condition. I know this all too well. So let me give you a little backstory on how this played out in my life before we get into the main dish. I was raised in a narcissistic, violent, and abusive home with physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. I was locked in the basement at times and terrorized, suffered malnutrition, and faced vicious beatings and ridicule. I grew up feeling inadequate, defective, unlovable, deeply flawed, and worthless, all of which hardwired me to become a highly stressed, anxious, and nervous individual. In my teens, I began suffering from debilitating anxiety attacks, clinical depression, and widespread chronic pain, which led to an addiction to alcohol, marijuana, sugar, caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, and serial relationships with abusive men in an attempt to self-medicate. By the age of 18, I was a full-blown alcoholic and drug addict, and my life was a train wreck. I searched for answers through conventional mental health counseling and mainstream medicine, but at the time I found no relief. And I became addicted to the benzodiazepines, which they prescribed for nearly 10 years as the so-called solution to my issues. But it only magnified the problem tenfold. I attempted suicide once, spent time in the psych ward, and engaged in never-ending counseling. This went on for a decade. At age 27, I felt completely dead, hollow, and empty inside. Dread and darkness consumed me. I could not get through the day without being high on something at every minute of every day. However, no matter how much I drank, smoked, snorted, or swallowed, I could no longer find relief from my anxiety, pain, depression, or emptiness. I was a walking dead person. It was then that I met my breaking point, and my life came crashing down like a demolition site. I landed in rehab for 30 days, broken into a million pieces. After rehab, I went to a halfway house for 2 months before returning to the real world. For the next year, I attended 12-step meetings faithfully, nearly every day, and sometimes several times a day, and worked the steps obsessively. I engaged in intensive psychotherapy, attended various support groups, and managed to stay clean and sober. However, I was intensely miserable. My anxiety increased dramatically in sobriety and was so acute that I shook uncontrollably and could barely function. The anxiety was so severe it caused me to hyperventilate numerous times a day, and I carried a paper bag around with me and was constantly slipping into bathrooms and hallways to breathe it out and regain composure. I was hanging on by a fine thread and often felt like I couldn't go on. Additionally, my son, a child at the time, had such severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that he was practically uncontrollable and had to repeat the first grade. Life was challenging, to say the least. Then, in 1989, an unexpected turn in the road occurred that provided me with a miracle. Through a series of events, I discovered I had candida overgrowth, hypoglycemia, also known as low blood sugar, hypothyroidism, severe chemical and mold sensitivities, adrenal fatigue, and some nutritional deficiencies. My son was also diagnosed with some of the same conditions. Treatment for these conditions required intense self-care, involving significant dietary and lifestyle changes. To my pleasant surprise, my disabling anxiety attacks disappeared completely when I made these changes, like magic, almost instantly. My son's ADHD improved by about 90%, and he became a brand new child. Not only was my anxiety relieved by these changes, but so were my depression and much of my widespread chronic pain. Furthermore, I never again experienced cravings for drugs or alcohol, and have not needed the assistance of a 12-step program in more than 36 years. I am now nearly 64 years old, and I continue to practice these holistic self-care practices daily. I attribute my decades of success to these practices. So, what were these changes that led to such a dramatic transformation in my life? Let's take a look. But one more thing before we do. I want to mention that all these changes were made at the instruction of my doctor at the time. And a little disclaimer, while I can't promise or guarantee these strategies will work for you, I hope they inspire you to explore new ways to manage your anxiety, stress, or any mental health condition you may be experiencing, and reclaim your inner peace. Any information I share is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. I am not a medical doctor, and I don't hold any type of mental health license. With all medical and mental health conditions, consult a qualified healthcare professional before making dietary and lifestyle changes or implementing any natural remedies. However, I am professionally trained in the mental health field and hold degrees in psychology and counseling, and more than 20 years of experience as a holistic health coach, educator, and author. Okay, so the first and most important change I made that enabled me to overcome anxiety attacks, depression, and addiction, and significantly improve my son's ADHD, was eliminating sugar from our diet. This provided dramatic and immediate improvements for both me and my son. Then I eliminated other forms of sugar, such as molasses, corn syrup, honey, fructose, etc. I also eliminated most high carbohydrate and starchy foods because they break down into sugar. Wheat and other grain products were also eliminated, although we did indulge in some of these from time to time, such as potatoes, legumes, quinoa, kamut, and spelt. All fruit juices were removed because they are a concentrated source of sugar, and I discovered that a large glass of orange juice would give me intense anxiety as if I had eaten a candy bar, although juices were permitted for my son as treats. All artificial sweeteners, flavorings, additives, dyes, and preservatives were avoided, absolutely no soda or soft drinks, and all forms of caffeine were eliminated. So, what did we eat? We ate only organic food that was free of hormones, antibiotics, pesticides, and herbicides. We ate only whole, nutrient-dense foods in their natural state, except for occasional treats from the health food store. We ate low carb. We ate lots of animal protein. It was the primary component of our diet. Eggs were also an acceptable protein source, and a moderate amount of healthy fats and low-carb vegetables. Fruits, nuts, and seeds were moderated but not eliminated completely. My son ate these more often than I did. We no longer drank milk, but butter, ghee, heavy cream, and yogurt were acceptable, and cheese was allowed occasionally. Chocolate was replaced with carob. So that is the diet we switched to in 1989, and I continue to follow to this day. However, over the years, I have eliminated other foods for various reasons, and at this point in my life, I also moderate other high glutamate and high histamine foods, and I eat even fewer carbs than I did initially. But we won't go into that in this video. That's a conversation for another day, because today I just want to talk about what initially freed me from the debilitating anxiety and the cycle of drug and alcohol addiction, and truly saved my life. But I will cover other parts of my journey in future videos, so be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you're interested. And you may want to note that I offer holistic health coaching by telephone, where I help individuals with chronic conditions to enhance physical and mental health using holistic wellness practices. So if you deal with any of the issues we are discussing today and would like help on your self-care journey, you can find a link to my site in the description below. Now, you might be wondering why these changes we made in diet would provide relief for anxiety, pain, depression, addiction, and ADHD. It is because each of the mental health conditions mentioned can have psychological and physiological roots. I had been addressing the psychological side, which is equally important, with rehab, AA, mental health counseling, support groups, etc., and life had certainly improved, but not nearly enough. I was unaware of the physiological roots, which had now been revealed to me, and addressing them was the missing piece of the puzzle. Furthermore, I came to understand that mental health is brain health. Our brains dictate how we feel, think, and behave. There cannot be good mental health without a properly functioning brain. I learned from my medical doctor at the time that all of the physiological conditions that we were diagnosed with, e.g., the candida, hypoglycemia, hypothyroidism, chemical and mold sensitivities, adrenal fatigue, and nutritional deficiencies, have a profound impact on the brain and nervous system and can be the impetus of anxiety disorders, depression, drug and alcohol addiction, and ADHD, as well as pretty much any other mental health symptom like compulsive overeating, OCD, and even schizophrenia. There are a variety of ways these physiological conditions can be the driving force for the psychological symptoms or conditions. First and foremost, each of the physiological conditions we had affected critical neurotransmitters in the brain, such as dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, endorphins, acetylcholine, glutamate, GABA, histamine, and cannabinoids. Neurotransmitters are naturally occurring chemicals in the brain and gut used by neurons to transmit information throughout the brain and body. Among other things, neurotransmitters regulate our moods, emotions, behavior, thoughts, memory, pain, cognitive functioning, ability to focus, sleep cycle, our stress response system and our ability to manage it, appetite, gut function, weight, speech, perception, motor functions, self-esteem, energy levels, sexual arousal and desire, and more. Neurotransmitters need to be in a particular balance for optimal functioning. Too much or too little and a wide array of psychological symptoms can be experienced, like anxiety, depression, pain, cravings for sugar, caffeine, nicotine, drugs and alcohol, chronic stress, compulsive overeating, OCD, and ADHD, as well as many other mental health symptoms we won't go into at this time. The brain is a vulnerable organ, and neurotransmitter balance can be easily disrupted by a wide variety of factors. All the physiological conditions that my son and I had can alter the production, release, and/or transmission of these neurotransmitters, which can result in depletion, excess, or imbalance of the neurotransmitters and the associated consequences. Additionally, the conditions we were diagnosed with can set off the stress response system in a variety of ways, which then leads to higher levels of stress, anxiety, and impaired brain function. When we addressed these underlying physiological conditions affecting the neurotransmitters and the stress response system, we restored some balance to brain chemistry, and the end result was relief of the symptoms of anxiety, depression, pain, addiction, and ADHD. Equally important, I learned at the time that the food we eat also has a profound impact on our brains. If we eat a lot of sugar, caffeine, artificial flavorings, sweeteners, dyes, preservatives, additives, junk food, chemicals, hormones, pesticides, herbicides, and highly processed foods, all common in the standard American diet, the brain cannot function properly and blood sugar will not remain stable. Drops in blood sugar can have profound effects on our mental health and result in a wide array of psychological symptoms like anxiety, depression, cravings for drugs and alcohol, irritability, many symptoms associated with ADHD, and much more. I discovered that keeping our blood sugar stable was a vital step in the process and continues to be so to this day. Many substances in the standard American diet can alter the production and transmission of neurotransmitters in the brain and gut, and set off the stress response system, potentially contributing to anxiety, depression, ADHD, addiction, and chronic stress. Our new diet helped keep our blood sugar from fluctuating, calmed the stress response system, and thus improved our mental health symptoms. The standard American diet is also highly lacking in nutrients, leading to nutritional deficiencies in much of the population. One U.S. survey found a high prevalence of inadequacies in multiple micronutrients. Other research suggests that up to 50% of the population may fail to ingest even the recommended daily allowance of various vitamins and minerals. Neurotransmitters are formed from the nutrients in our food. Neurons use the amino acids, vitamins, minerals, and cofactors found in our food to create neurotransmitters. If even one of these nutrients is missing, production can be impaired. Healthy fats are also needed for neurotransmission. If we eat a nutrient-deficient diet, the brain lacks the raw materials needed to produce neurotransmitters adequately and transmit them properly. When my son and I made these dietary changes, we ate a more nutritious diet, giving our brains what they needed to function properly. Thus, we experienced relief from our symptoms of depression, anxiety, pain, addiction, and ADHD. I believe the single most important self-care habit we can form to help with any physiological or mental health condition is eating a nutrient-dense whole food diet. A growing body of research underscores the significant impact of diet on mental health, with various studies suggesting that our dietary choices influence mood, cognitive function, and the risk of mental health disorders. Without a doubt, I feel that these dietary changes are the primary element that has enabled 36 years of successful recovery from my mental health issues. So I encourage you to reflect on your own diet and assess whether it might be playing a role in your mental health. Do some research and locate the many studies that highlight the important role of diet in mental and physical health. Perhaps you can make profound transformations in your own life. However, a second self-care practice, equally instrumental in improving our mental health, accompanied our dietary changes. This involved adopting a holistic and environmentally friendly lifestyle and practicing holistic health. Again, at my doctor's instruction, I stopped using things like perfume, air fresheners, hairspray, fingernail polish, chemical-based cleaners, disinfectants and detergents, pesticides and herbicides, and avoided mold. We switched all personal care and household cleaning products to environmentally friendly, non-toxic versions. Why did we do this? Because these products contain toxins that exacerbate all of the conditions we were diagnosed with. And why did this help with anxiety, ADHD, pain, and addiction? Many studies link various environmental toxins to a wide variety of mental health issues. Toxins impair hormones and neurotransmitter production and function in and of themselves, and as we already discussed, this can lead to symptoms of anxiety, ADHD, depression, and addiction. Eliminating toxins from our daily life supported our brain function and improved our mental health. Living holistically also included practicing holistic health. This meant we considered all aspects of our health and how they interact to create the larger picture. Instead of addressing only medical symptoms, we considered various dimensions, including but not limited to physical, emotional, mental, social, environmental, financial, intellectual, occupational, and spiritual well-being. And we took an active role in our healing journey and in maintaining our physical and emotional well-being, all of which relieved our symptoms of ADHD, depression, anxiety, and addiction. And there was a third critical self-care change that took place at the same time as our new diet and holistic living, and that was that I quit smoking. At the time I was diagnosed with these health issues, I was smoking 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day. The doctor made it clear there was no way to improve any of my conditions if I continued smoking. He said it was non-negotiable, quit now. So I did so promptly. Besides the obvious fact that smoking weakens the immune system and causes cancer and lung disease, it also triggers the liver to release stored sugar into the bloodstream and impairs the endocrine system. This exacerbates candida overgrowth and makes keeping blood sugar levels stable impossible, which we established earlier is critical for mental health. And nicotine is an addictive and mind-altering drug that impairs neurotransmitter production and function. Several studies have found that smoking interferes with the brain's ability to recover from drug and alcohol abuse, demonstrating its serious impact on neurotransmitters. So to have properly functioning neurotransmitters, which as we discussed is vital to prevent symptoms like depression, anxiety, ADHD, and addiction, nicotine must be avoided.
So, making these three changes, proper diet, no smoking, and holistic living, completely altered not only the quality of my life, but also the trajectory of my life, even transforming who I was as a person. I was completely free from the chains that had bound me. Anxiety attacks, depression, and cravings for drugs or alcohol no longer dominated my life. My son could now do his schoolwork and wasn't bouncing off the walls. Our relationship became less chaotic, more balanced, and more loving. I was in complete awe of what I had learned and the transformation I was able to achieve, and I was appalled that nobody in the mental health field knew what I had discovered. It became my mission in life to educate anyone who would listen about what I had learned, so that others might not have to suffer, become dependent on substances, and lose years of their lives as I did. And that is what brought me into this line of work. I attended college for 10 years, earning degrees in psychology and counseling, and went into private practice as a holistic health coach and educator. I am the author of more than 15 self-care books on the topics of candida overgrowth, SIBO, mindfulness, drug and alcohol addiction, sugar and carb addiction, depression, migraines, chronic stress, and anxiety. I tell you all this so you can see that I am a completely different person. The contrast with the lost and empty soul who was crippled with anxiety and addiction is striking. And this is not the story I would be telling if I had not stumbled upon this remarkable information and developed these self-care habits. My anxiety attacks after rehab threatened my sobriety I had worked so hard for. I shudder to think what would have happened if this miracle had not come along. So I have always considered this knowledge to be one of the greatest gifts I've ever received, and that's why I'm so passionate about sharing it with others. So how do I know these dietary and lifestyle changes led to our incredible transformation? Because initially I was skeptical, and I tested this repeatedly. Without fail, if we remained committed to our new diet and lifestyle, our symptoms subsided. If we abandoned the new diet and lifestyle, our symptoms returned. The changes were so profound and the symptom relief so great that it was undeniable. There was no doubt in my mind that these changes were responsible for our improved mental health. But one last important point I want to cover is that there were a variety of other self-care practices I adopted in 1989 after I made the changes in diet and lifestyle and quit smoking, and throughout the last 36 years that I also use heavily, which include the following: deep breathing exercises, mindfulness, meditation, time in nature, prioritizing sleep, bird watching, regular physical activity, solitude, self-compassion, journaling, setting boundaries, learning assertiveness, self-love, and more. In recent years, I've added brain retraining and self-havening to the list. I'm always looking for something new to add to my toolbox. But diet and holistic living are the two most critical practices. They are the foundation upon which everything else is built. In my experience, if these two components are not in place, then nothing else is very effective. If we are experiencing anxiety, depression, ADHD, addiction, etc., because our brain is impaired by low blood sugar, candida overgrowth, adrenal fatigue, hypothyroidism, environmental toxins, a nutrient-deficient diet, or drug and alcohol use, then the benefits of mindfulness, deep breathing, and time in nature, etc., are hindered and may even be minimal or non-existent. We are fighting an uphill battle. I know this to be true. When I tried techniques like deep breathing and biofeedback before sobriety and changes in my diet and lifestyle, I didn't find them helpful. But when I revisited these techniques after making those changes, I found them to be lifesavers. However, they must be used in conjunction with proper diet and a holistic lifestyle and practiced faithfully. When combined with proper diet and lifestyle, the benefits gained from techniques such as deep breathing and meditation are compounded and magnified. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to clarify that I'm not against traditional counseling in any way, and I'm not saying it isn't helpful or that it should be dismissed. My formal education is in psychology and counseling. but I choose to focus on the physiological contributors to our mental health rather than the psychological ones, because this information is greatly lacking in the field. However, after I made changes in my diet and lifestyle that saved my life, I continued counseling for many years, working on childhood abuse, trauma, relationship issues, parenting, and various other things. And I have continued to use counseling extensively throughout my life whenever needed, and there have been many instances. I have probably had more counseling than most people. There are great benefits to be found with a skilled and competent traditional counselor. The problem in the mental health field is that all mental health conditions can have psychological or physiological roots. The mental health field is great at addressing the psychological, but not so much for the physiological. Most do not address physiological contributors at all. Very few have any knowledge of physiological contributors. Sadly, it is not part of their training, but it certainly should be. Counseling is not very helpful when the root of someone's depression is an underactive thyroid, or if anxiety is triggered by microbial overgrowth or hypoglycemia. But if we work on both the physiological and the psychological, then miracles can happen. Addressing my physiological contributors made my mental health counseling much more effective, and vice versa. Mental health counseling is a component of my self-care plan when needed, but it is pretty much useless to me without the other components. And I do not go to mental health providers for my physiological contributors. I take care of that myself and with enlightened medical practitioners. I only go to mental health care for my psychological contributors, and I know how to distinguish between the two, and I do not ever allow anyone to prescribe psych meds for me. I have practiced holistic self-care for 36 years and expect to continue until the day I die. It is my intentional and conscious effort to remain committed to these practices, day in and day out, that relieves my physiological and psychological symptoms and keeps my mental health stable. Without them, I would not be standing and my mental health would fall apart. Commitment and consistency are key. Self-care must be my #1 priority. So now I encourage you to take a look at your own symptoms and do a little research. Is it possible you have any underlying physiological conditions that may be affecting your mental health? Are there areas in your diet and lifestyle that could be improved to support your physical and mental well-being? Make a list and talk it over with your healthcare practitioner. You may be surprised by the improvements that can be achieved. And remember, if you need help along the way, I offer consultations by phone. We can work together to identify potential underlying contributors, assess diet and lifestyle factors, and build a holistic self-care plan that can help you take charge of your healing journey so you can become more who you are meant to be and live a more peaceful and fulfilling life. A link to my site is in the description below. Additionally, I have another video that goes into detail about what constitutes real self-care to help you on your journey. Watch this video next as I redefine self-care so you can discover its many transformative benefits. It should be displayed for you now somewhere on this screen. Thank you for watching, and remember to take good care of yourselves.